Hello everyone, my name is Nilanjan Chatterjee and today we are going to discuss Buddhism, origin, philosophy, spread and legacy. So in today's video we'll be talking about Buddhism, which stands as one of history's most influential religious and philosophical traditions, emerging from the Indian subcontinent in the 6th century BCE. It offered a radical alternative to prevailing Brahminical ritualism and rigid caste hierarchies. In our previous videos, we discussed Ajivikas and the Charvakas and how heterodox sects emerged in the later Vedic period from after the decline of the later Vedic period. And today we'll be concentrating solely on Buddhism. Founded by Siddhartha Gautama, who would become known as the Buddha or the Enlightened One, this tradition promoted ethical living, rational inquiry, compassion, and individual salvation. So these are the major tenets of Buddhism, and we'll be focusing on the history and philosophy of Buddhism in a nutshell. Before we get into our main discussion, let me tell you one thing. We, the Universal Group of Institutions, have started our admission program. If you are interested in joining our college, please visit our website. We have BA, BSc and BCom courses along with integrated UPSC and IAS coaching. Apart from that, we have Universal PU College along with CSAT and CUET training programs. Okay, so feel free to join our college, and please remember one thing: if you use the referral code of NIL009, I'm repeating, if you use our referral code of NIL009, you'll get some attractive discounts. Let's come to our first slide, that is the age of questioning. Okay, 6th century BCE. Why is it so important to know about 6th century BCE? Because it gives you an understanding of the background. Okay, it tells you about from where Buddhism emerged. Okay, the first point is urban revolution. Okay, rise of 16 Mahajanapadas, which are known as the large territorial states with growing cities like Rajagriha, Ujjaini, Kashi, etc., supported by expanding agriculture and iron technology. This is very important. Why important? Because urban centers which are emerging from 6th century BCE is marking the decline of Vedic ritualism and Vedic age in general, the superiority of Brahminism. Why? Primary reason is from 6th century onwards, along with the development of city states and territorial states, Janapadas and Mahajanapadas, we see rise of multiple occupations, okay, rise of multiple professions along with the cities. What does that indicate? It indicates that Brahminism has different counterparts. Okay, Brahminism suddenly faced challenges coming from other occupational groups, other occupational categories, other professions. So different professions are emerging and making money and challenging the hegemony of Brahminism. That promised a rather more egalitarian society, okay, that created the bedrock for challenges or for movements like for heterodox sects like Buddhism and Jainism to challenge the Brahminical superiority, the Brahminical hegemony. So different professions are emerging to counter the profession of the Brahmins. Okay, so that is how we see a turnover, a gradual turnover in the social structure. Now let's come to the next slide, that is economic transformation. I already mentioned growth of trade. Now when cities are emerging, you can't expect the economy to be stagnant, okay, like it was during the Vedic period. Okay, there were multiple modes of production during Vedic period, but sacrifices, okay, sacrifices dominated a huge area of economy, okay, in the Vedic period, which is changing from 6th century BC onwards. Okay, growth of trade, which enabled the mercantile communities to flourish. Okay, people are making more money, and those money, the basis of those money, they are challenging the superiority of the Brahmins who have access to spiritual capital. Okay, merchant classes and emergence of merchant classes like Sethis and Gahapatis, emergence of punch-marked coins, and market economies created new social dynamics. So we can see currencies also from this point of time. The entire socio-economic structure is changing. Okay, from 6th century BC, I've already explained. The third important point is spiritual ferment, proliferation of heterodox sects challenging Vedic ritual order, including Buddhists, Jainas, Ajivikas, and materialist Charvakas. Okay, they are all challenging, questioning the functioning and dominance of Vedic literature, Vedic culture, and Vedic political structure, socio-political structure. Now let's come to our main slide, that is Siddhartha Gautama, the journey to enlightenment. Who was the pioneer of Buddhism and how was his life? That is what we are going to discuss. The very first point is royal beginnings. Okay, the birth of Siddhartha Gautama, born in Lumbini, which is in modern day Nepal, to the Shakya clan. Siddhartha was raised in luxury in Kapilavastu, while sheltered from life's sufferings. So, Siddhartha, who belonged to Shakya clan, which is a Kshatriya clan, he was protected by his parents from all the lively sufferings, okay, all the sufferings of human lives. Okay, why was he protected? Because their parents had a notion that if he gets to see all the sufferings of human lives, he may not perform well as a Kshatriya ruler. Okay, the next point, there are other theories as well coming from the Buddhist literature, from the Buddhist sources. Let's stick to this point. The four sights, this is another very important notion. Encountering Siddhartha encountered an old man, a sick person, a corpse, and an ascetic. So, after a point of time, Siddhartha Gautama got the opportunity to go out of his house and experience the world. So, on his way, he saw four things. First is an old man. What does that old man suggest? That old man, the sight of old man suggests that Siddhartha got to know what happens to human beings once they get older. That means when you get older, you get burdened with your experience and you have little expectation from your life. Why? Because you know you do not have absolute control over your life or over your belongings, because you are about to die. You have not died yet, but you will be dying very soon because you are old. The second is a sick person who is basically suffering from illness. So a person who's sick is suffering. Okay, the next is a corpse, that means a dead body, who has passed the phase of suffering. That means he has already suffered, and now no one knows what his soul is doing, what is the condition of his soul, since he has already passed away. So a corpse, he who has already overcome suffering. And an ascetic, that means a person who is purposely, who has dissociated, who has detached all his worldly possessions and has come out. An ascetic, that is a sage or a sannyasi. okay, who has renounced all his worldly possessions. So these are the four things Buddha got to see once he went out. Now, if a person sees these things, it will lead to some deep epistemological and ontological questions as to what is this and who am I? What is my purpose and what is to be done? So these are the questions that came to the mind of Buddha. So he started his spiritual journey. He moved out for a spiritual search. He wandered the Gangetic plains, studied under spiritual teachers like Uddaka, okay, and Alara Kalama, and practiced extreme austerities before rejecting them as futile. So you have to go through all these sufferings according to Buddhism to understand the reality. And reality may not be suffering. That is a separate thing. That can be a separate thing. But to understand reality, you have to go through sufferings. And why did Buddha come to this conclusion? Because of the very first four sites that we already discussed. So let's come to the next slide, that is enlightenment. I was not willing to use this term enlightenment because enlightenment is a very European understanding of knowledge and knowledge formation, but still it is the safest word to use. After deep meditation under the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, he Buddha attained enlightenment and became known as the Buddha or the enlightened person. Now, why I was not willing to use the word enlightenment? Because in Buddhist literature, you will find the word nirvana. Okay, in Buddhist literature, you'll find the word nirvana or nibbana. Okay, which can be translated to liberation or which can be translated to a final goal, but not necessarily enlightenment. Because enlightenment, the word enlightenment, gives some kind of a connotation of getting enlightened. So let's come to the next slide. So the four noble truths, that is our next point. So we have already seen that when Buddha went out, he experienced four different sights. From four different sights, he came to the conclusion of the four noble truths. Okay, that is also called Arya Satya. Okay, Arya Satya or Arya Satchani. Arya Satya or Arya Satchani. What are these four noble truths which he derived from the four sights that he experienced? One is dukkha, that is suffering. I am repeating, it may not be the absolute reality, but it is one of the core compounds of Buddhism. Dukkha, that is suffering. Life is inherently full of suffering, dissatisfaction, and imperfection. Okay, this encompasses physical pain, emotional distress, and existential angst, because you always experience dissatisfaction, imperfection, and suffering. That is dukkha. Okay, which he realized from the four sights that he experienced. That is, dukkha is constant. Now, is there a way to overcome dukkha? Before that, we need to discuss what is the reason behind the dukkha. That is, samudaya, the cause, the second point of the Arya Satchani. Samudaya, that is the cause. The cause of suffering is craving, that is tanha, and attachment. Okay, rooted in fundamental ignorance about the nature of reality and the self. That means when you desire for something, Okay, when you want something, when you feel attached to the worldly possessions, that means you are basically driven by your worldly attachments, and that will cause suffering according to Buddhism. Two things. One is attachment and craving, that is tanha or thirst. These are the main things. These are the two things that is preventing you to live your life, to seek for reality, for truth. Okay, that is preventing you. Third, that is nirodha. It is possible to end suffering by overcoming craving and attachment through spiritual awakening and enlightenment. So, we are not saying that there is no way you can get out of this suffering. Of course, there are ways to get out of this suffering, because you know that suffering is there and it is constant. You know, you have excavated and found out that there is a reason behind the suffering. Now, you also got to know that there are possible ways to overcome suffering. Now, the fourth point is basically the magga, or the ways through which you can overcome suffering. What are these maggas? These maggas are called the Eightfold Path, the Ashtangika Marga, or Atthanga Magga, the Noble Eightfold Path. Okay, the first path is right view, Samyaga Drishti, understanding the Four Noble Truths and seeing the reality as it is. Okay, the next, the second is right intention, that is Samyaga Sankalpa, commitment to ethical and mental self improvement. Okay, next is right speech, that is Samyag Vak, speaking truthfully. When you are truthful to yourself, avoiding slander, gossip, and abusive speech. Okay, next is right action, Samyaga Karmarata, okay, or Karma, behaving peacefully and harmoniously, abstaining from stealing and harming. This is Samyaga Karma. Next is right livelihood, Samyaga Jiva. Okay, making one's living in an ethical and non-harmful way. Okay, so you have to also regulate your livelihood or lifestyle. Next is, now there is right effort, that is Samyaga Pradhana. Okay, cultivating positive states of mind while abandoning the negative ones. The next is right mindfulness, which is Samyaga Smriti, developing awareness of body, your physical capacities, feelings, mind, and phenomena, yourself and your perceived object or your perceived reality. You have to be very cautious about both these things. Okay, both the question of epistemology, what is this, the science of knowing, and ontology, the study of being. And finally, right concentration, that is developing mental focus necessary for insight, that is Samyag Samadhi. Okay, Samyag Samadhi. So these are the noble eightfold path proposed by Buddhism. Okay, in the next slide we can see the key Buddhist doctrines understanding reality, that is Anicca. The main important theme is Anicca, that is impermanence. All phenomenon, according to the Anicca philosophy, all phenomena are in constant flux. So according to the Anicca philosophy, all phenomena are in constant flux, transient and subject to change. Nothing remains the same from moment to moment. This impermanence applies to physical objects, mental states, relationships, and even the self. So that is one of the most peculiar feature of Buddhism. It doesn't talk about stagnance. It doesn't talk about something static. It asks you to move. Okay, that is the one of the basic features of Buddhism. Okay, another important thing is Anatta, that is non-self. There is no permanent unchanging soul or essence within beings. So the beings are also changing. What we call self is actually a collection of constantly changing physical and mental processes rather than a fixed entity. Okay, so your position in order to attain nirvana, okay, your meditation, your attention should also change in accordance with the reality that you are experiencing. So that is what Buddhism talks about, the change in the self also. Okay, in the next slide, we have karma and rebirth. Actions have consequences that shape future experiences. Unlike deterministic views, Buddhist karma emphasizes intention behind actions. So, you have intentions behind actions, and those actions have repercussions or consequences. The cycle of rebirth continues until one achieves liberation, that is nirvana. Okay, unlike Vedic orthodoxy, Buddhism rejected rituals, priestlyhood, and Vedic authority, focusing instead on personal experience and moral effort. So it, on one hand, it is challenging deterministic features of the Ajivika philosophy. On the other hand, it is also questioning Brahmanism by enabling people to think about spirituality on their own. You do not need to go up to a priest to have spiritual to get spiritual knowledge. You can attain spirituality on your own. Buddhism, opens the door for everyone. Sangha, the Buddhist monastic community, which is also called laity, inclusive community. Entry was voluntary and open to all castes, including Shudras and eventually women, due to Ananda's intervention, challenging the rigid social hierarchies of the time. Okay, so Buddhism relied on congregations which were called sanghas or laities, where people will conglomerate and talk about the preachings of Buddha, the philosophies. Okay, and disciplined living. Vinaya Pitaka laid down detailed monastic codes, rules for discipline, conduct, and hierarchy that governed daily life in monasteries. Okay, one of the main literary source of Buddhism is the Tripitaka. Okay, Tripitaka are basically three Pitakas. One is Vinaya Pitaka, the other one is Sutta Pitaka, and the third one is Abhidhamma Pitaka. So, what are the Pitakas? Vinaya Pitaka, Sutta Pitaka, and Abhidhamma Pitaka. These are the three Pitakas which are considered as Buddhist doctrinal literature. Sangha, another point. The Sangha relied on alms of lay followers and was supported by merchant or mercantile classes. Wealthy householders often made donations, creating symbiotic relationships. Okay, so Buddhism also targeted wealthy people so that it get disseminated amongst the upper tier of the society as well. Okay, now we have come to our next slide, that is the Buddhist councils, the Buddhist Sangitis or laities. Okay, the first council was held in Rajagriha in 483 BCE. held shortly after Buddha's death, okay, which took place in 483 BCE under King Ajatashatru's patronage and led by Mahakashyapa. This first council took place. Okay, the oral teachings were systematized into Vinaya Pitaka. The oral teachings of Buddha were systematized in Vinaya Pitaka, and which is also known as monastic rules, and Sutta Pitaka, that is discourses. I've already told you about the three Pitakas, Sutta, Vinaya, and Abhidhamma Pitakas. Now we are getting into details. The first council, Rajagriha, 483 BCE. Immediately after Buddha's death, King Ajatashatru patronized and led by Mahakashyapa. So, the second council in Vaishali around 383 BCE addressed disputes on monastic practices like accepting money and storing salt, marking the beginning of sectarian divisions within Buddhism. So from 383, that is 4th century BC onwards, we see counter narratives are also emerging to question some kind of political or social stagnance that we can experience within the field, within the domain of Buddhism. Okay, and the second council held in Vaishali in 383 BCE actually addressed these questions. Okay, the third council, which took place during Ashoka's reign, conducted during Ashoka's reign to eliminate heretical elements, also marked missionary expansion and the addition of Abhidhamma Pitaka, which is the philosophical elaborations. Okay, so we right now we know the developments of three Pitakas, Sutta, Vinaya, and Abhidhamma Pitaka. We also know that the third council, which was held in Pataliputra in 250 BCE, was conducted by King Ashoka, the great Mauryan emperor. Okay, so the final and the fourth council, which took place in Kashmir in 1st century BCE, held under Kushana Emperor Kanishka, marking the final split between Hinayana or Theravada, with its strict adherence to early texts, and the Mahayana Buddhism, okay, with its emphasis on bodhisattvas. Okay, so these are the four Sangitis. This fourth Sangiti is very important because from this Sangiti onwards, from this council onwards, we see a bifurcation of Buddhist ideology. One is the Theravada Buddhism, which is also known as the Hinayana Buddhism, and the other one is the Mahayana Buddhism. Okay. Later on, we see emergence of other Buddhist practices, principles like the Vajrayana Buddhism, but we'll come to that later. Emperor Ashoka, Buddhism's greatest patron, after the bloody Kalinga War, Ashoka experienced profound remorse and adopted Dhamma, uh, transforming from a conqueror to a moral ruler. Okay, Ashoka introduced his own moral code that is also known as Dhamma, which we should not confuse, we should not collapse with the Buddhist Dhamma, which is Buddhist preachings or Buddhist philosophy. But Ashoka was a great patron of Buddhism. Okay, and for some historians, Ashoka got converted to Buddhism even before the Kalinga War. But according to the Buddhist literature, he got converted to Buddhism after the Kalinga War, and Buddhism changed his monastic lifestyle. Buddhism changed his lifestyle as a ruler. Okay, and from Chandashoka he became Dharmashoka. So we see a gradual transformation of Ashoka as a ruler when he was not a follower of Buddhism, and after getting converted to Buddhism, how his life changed, which is clearly mentioned in multiple Buddhist literature. Okay, according to Ashoka, there are edicts and proclamations issued by Ashoka inscribed in Prakrit, Greek, and Aramaic on rocks and pillars throughout his empire, promoting non-violence, tolerance, ethical governance. So all these things can be understood as Ashoka's Dhamma and not Buddhist Dhamma. Okay, these are separate things. But what we can understand, Ashoka was deeply influenced by the Buddhist doctrines, by the preachings of Buddha, which actually helped him to conduct his own moral code, that is Dhamma. Okay, Dhamma, the idea of Dhamma propounded by Ashoka was deeply influenced, drenched with Buddhist uh, philosophy. Okay, uh, now the final point, that is architectural patronage. Ashoka sponsored construction of 84,000 stupas, including major monuments at Sanchi, Bharut, and Amravati, that became centers of Buddhist art and pilgrimage. Okay, I'm repeating, Ashoka's Dhamma was a moral conduct, not a religion. Okay, it was highly imbibed, highly influenced by Buddhism. Okay, so also missionary expeditions, expansions. Ashoka sent Buddhist missionaries to Sri Lanka, Gandhara, Alexandria, and Southeast Asia, transforming Buddhism from a regional sect into a pan-Asian religion. Okay, the spread of Buddhism is our next point, a global journey. From trade routes, Buddhism spread along the Silk Road and maritime trade networks carried by merchants and missionaries. The second point is monastic institutions, centers like Nalanda, Vikramashila, which were basically educational institutions, centers, universities of ancient period, and Takshila became international hubs of Buddhist learning. The next point is textual translations. Buddhist texts translated into Chinese, Tibetan, Central Asian languages facilitated cultural adaptations. And the fourth point is royal patronage. The Buddhists in general sought for royal patronage to popularize their religion. Support from the rulers of the Mauryas to Kushanas to Guptas enabled institutional growth of Buddhism. Okay, Buddhism's global footprint. Sri Lanka, the Theravada stronghold, okay, received Buddhism via Mahendra, one of the sons of Ashoka, becoming a bastion of Theravada tradition, with ancient sites like Anuradhapura preserving early Buddhist practices and texts. Okay, Central Asia, Buddhist art flourished in Bactria, Khotan, Bamiyan, creating unique syncretic styles with blended Greco-Persian, Greco-Roman architecture. Okay, and Indian influences along the Silk Road. Okay, next point is Tibet, the Vajrayana heartland. Vajrayana Buddhism became dominant in Tibet, creating a unique religious political system with monasteries serving as centers of power and artistic expression. Now we come to the detailed analysis of the different Buddhist traditions: Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. Theravada means the teachings of the Theras, okay, the teachings of the elders, focusing on individual salvation. Everyone should look for their individual liberation or nirvana. Okay, that is Theravada. The next is Mahayana, that is the great vehicle, emphasizing bodhisattva ideal and universal salvation. That means a person should actually sacrifice his nirvana, his liberation, for the others. Okay, so he will wait in the world of suffering until everyone reaches nirvana. So that is the bodhisattva ideal. That is the key element in the of the Mahayana Buddhism. And finally, the tantric manifestation of Buddhism, that is the Vajrayana Buddhism, the thunderbolt vehicle, okay, merging tantric practices with Mahayana Buddhism. So these are the three different sects within Buddhism. The Theravada Buddhism predominant in Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Thailand, and Cambodia focuses on Arhat ideal, okay, and individual salvation through strict adherence to early texts and monastic discipline. Theravada is the earlier form of Buddhism which asks you to stick to individual salvation. Mahayana Buddhism, on the other hand, found across China, Korea, Japan, Vietnam, introduced the compassionate bodhisattva ideal, enlightened beings who postpone nirvana to help others. Okay? Vajrayana Buddhism, centered in Tibet, Bhutan, Mongolia, and parts of Nepal, incorporated tantric practices. Okay, so we know the historical geography of these uh, different sects, the sacred geographies. Now we have come to Buddhist art and architecture. Buddhist art evolved from early aniconic representations, symbols like wheels, lotus, okay, uh, bodhi tree, to anthropomorphic depictions, okay, in first century CE, where we see human figurines in Buddhist art and architecture, humanly manifestations, okay. Two major sculptural traditions emerged, at least in India. One is the Gandhara school with Greco-Roman features of and realism, and the other one is Mathura school, okay, with its spiritual aura, which is a much more indigenous style. Gandhara school and Mathura school, okay. Architectural forms include stupas, memorial mounds containing relics, decorated with toranas and narrative reliefs at sites like Sanchi and Bharut, and rock cut chaityas. Chaityas are also called prayer halls and viharas. Viharas means monasteries, like at Ajanta, Ellora, Karle, etc. Okay, featuring elaborate frescoes depicting Buddhist stories and daily life. Women in Buddhism, the Bhikkhuni Sangha, initially hesitant. Buddha eventually permitted the creation of Bhikkhuni Sangha, the nuns' order, at the persistent request of his disciple Ananda and the commitment shown by his foster mother Mahapajapati Gautami. Okay? The revolutionary development institutionalized female renunciation and offered women a path to spiritual liberation previously thought reserved for men. So the women are also finding a refuge. Okay, I mean, they are finding an alternative lifestyle, going beyond the oppression of Brahminical social structure through Buddhism. Although Buddha did not allow in his in his earlier times, later on with the persuasion of Ananda and his foster mother Mahapajapati Gautami, he approved the entrance of women in the Sangitis or laities, the Bhikkhuni Sangha. So the next point is Therigata poets. The Therigata, a canonical Pali text composed by early Buddhist nuns, contains poems of enlightenment, reflection, and rebellion, an unparalleled window into ancient women's lives. Okay, women like Patachara, who found solace in the Sangha after losing her entire family, became symbols of transformation through spiritual insight. Okay. Now the next point is structural limitations. Of course, there were structural limitations. The Buddha imposed 8 Garudhammas, heavy rules upon bhikkhunis, placing them in a subordinate position to the monks. These included requirements that nuns must bow even to junior monks and could not criticize them. So these kind of social stratifications were there even within Buddhist community, that we can see even during Buddha's period. Okay, Buddhism's social impact. Challenging the caste system, Buddhism's open access to Sangha regardless of caste origin challenged the rigid Varna system, and it opened, like I mentioned, the gateway for everyone to celebrate and to live a spiritual lifestyle. Uh, Educational revolutions, for example, Nalanda, Vikramashila, Takshila, these were institutes, universities which grew as centers of Buddhist preachings, Buddhist knowledge, philosophy, etc. Economic transformation, monasteries evolved into banking, trading, agricultural hubs, developing new economic models and supporting regional development. Okay, cultural exchange, Buddhism served as India's primary vehicle for cultural influence across Asia, facilitating exchange of ideas, arts, forms, etc. Okay. Now we can see a graph as to how the decline of Buddhism can be understood. From 3rd century BCE, the royal patronage is kind of declining, and it has come to an absolute collapse by 12th century BCE. But as we can see, Buddhist monasteries and their growth is, is strikingly important, particularly in 5th century CE. Okay, it was mediocre in the 3rd century BCE, and it is rising in the 5th century CE. But gradually, with the demise, with the decline of educational institutions and monasteries, it is also coming to a decline by 12th century CE. Okay, so from 3rd century BCE to 12th century CE, this is the complete arc of Buddhism in India. Okay, Buddhism beyond India, we can see Chinese Buddhism. In China, Buddhism emerged with Confucian ethics and a Taoist metaphysics, creating distinctive schools like Chan, Pure Land, and Tiantai. Okay, with the help of Confucian philosophy, Confucius, his philosophy, and Taoist philosophy, Buddhism took its own form in China. And in Japan, in 6th century CE, Buddhism in Japan developed unique forms like Zen, with its emphasis on meditation and aesthetic minimalism. Okay, that is also one manifestation of Buddhism. Tibetan Buddhism is also that. In Tibet, Buddhism became intertwined and with the political system through the Dalai Lama institution. It preserved many Indian tantric traditions that were lost in homeland, and developed elaborate ritual practices and philosophical systems. So now we have come to our final slides. Modern Buddhist revival, Ambedkar's conversion to Buddhism in 1956, which is a revival of Buddhism, one can say. Are global practitioners of almost 500 million people. There are 8 major Buddhist heritage sites recognized by UNESCO in India, okay, and meditation growth of 40%. Okay, so these are the important points that we want to mention. And the enduring legacy of Buddhism, the ethical framework of Buddhism, which even influenced the later philosophies of India, the philosophical insight of mind, reality, etc., that Buddhism gave us, the artistic inspiration through different schools of art that Buddhism propagated later on, and the practical techniques which Buddhism celebrates in the form of Majjhim Pantha. Okay, in the form of Majjhim Pantha, Majjhim and Pantha. That is the middle path. After all these sufferings, I mean, how to live your life in a true Buddhist way through Majjhim Pantha. You can suffer, also you can understand, you have the senses to understand reality. And Majjhim Pantha kinds of enables you to do these things. So that is it for today. Next day we'll be coming with another video on Jainism. Please feel free to share your thoughts. If you have anything, any doubt, please ask in the comment section. Thank you very much. See you in the next video.